Thanks for checking out my process video. So before we get started, here's a look at the supplies I'm going to be using. There will be descriptions of the art supplies below in the video description. So without further ado, let's get started. I don't normally do blue line pencils, but since this is going to be mainly ink or black and white, and I haven't quite decided if I wanted to color this page yet, I'm not going to hesitate to use the color erase pencil. This perspective is a little tricky because I have different perspectives going all over the place. It's like a 3-point perspective, and I don't want the background to be so busy that it takes away from the actual characters. And some of this is a little bit of eyeing the perspective just a little bit. And then it's always good, of course, to step away from the piece. So I'm just getting in the basic idea for the neon building signs and storefronts. And then once I start penciling it, I'm going to go ahead and outline the main signs first, and then start adding in the little detail for the wording that's going to go on these signs. Again, I'm just deciding the basic structure of the buildings so that I'm not overwhelmed with a bunch of guidelines and stuff like that. I'll wait to do that when I end up penciling the page in the background. So I'm going to measure from here, using this as my reference point. I'm going to use a Mono H pencil, a Tombow, to try to do the background, and it's an H lead because I don't want to start smudging all over the place when I'm trying to do these guidelines, and I'm still trying to figure out exactly how it's going to look. So picking out the building signs that I'm going to make for sure I want is where I start, and then I try to figure out compositionally so that everything is not all just straight, since the building is straight, to try to get a flow going from the character up here down here and kind of bounce your eye around a little bit so it's not just a straight shot downward. So there's my first sign. My second main sign down here. I might have a couple of horizontal signs just to change it up a bit. I think I'll use a different H pencil because this one was sharpened with the X-Acto knife, so it's not one straight line weight. I'll hold that back for something else. I guess 2H might work. Let's try this one out. I have to be a little careful with the, what do you call it, tangents. So right here, this would be considered a tangent. So I'm going to pull the handle of the sword a little higher so as to not blend it in with the street sign in the back, the logo. That should be okay, and if I darken this when I actually ink, then it would separate the sign from the sword. Okay, so we have a sign in the back. This is a building that's further back. And this will be the top of this building. And I'm holding the pencil on the side so that I could get a slightly thicker line than if I held it straight up and down. Okay, this will be the edge of this building. And I think I'll switch out pencils so that I could make a thicker line here. And ending it at the vanishing point up there. So I'm going to go in and outline the parts that I know are just going to be solid lines, just so I have a guide, and then go in afterwards and start adding in the detail to the signs with pencil. So I'm going to jump around a little bit, and sometimes I do that just so that like I accomplish something. I think drawing backgrounds is, for me personally, a very complex and tedious part of the process. So I used to draw the characters first and then go in and finalize the background, but I realized that once I've done that, I've already used up all my fuel, so it's better to kind of jump in and do the hard stuff first, in this case, so that I at least get it over with and feel like I've accomplished something. And, you know, there's not one set process that I go through. Keeps it interesting for me, but at the same time, it's hard to get used to stuff because I keep changing things up. And of course, there's some things on here I'm not quite sure about yet, so I'll probably leave those blank. But the things I am sure about, I can go ahead and outline that with the multiliner. And I'm using this small ruler, so it makes it easier for me to just glide through the page instead of kind of lifting it up, you know, like the T-square. Because of the shape, gets kind of gets in the way sometimes when I'm trying to do things really fast. So I reserve that for if I absolutely need to draw really long lines and the vanishing point and stuff. But for this works just fine. And it also extends out as well. Locks in. It's really good for traveling. I put this on my sketchbook. Since I've waited 15 years to work on this cover, I should probably spend the extra time just to make the signs look cool and interesting instead of just throwing logos and stuff on here. Maybe have some of it tell a story. But there's so many signs. Especially the big ones. I don't know if I want to put writing on them or symbols, because then it could get distracting. So I have to figure out what I'm going to put right here so it's not distracting and taking away from the two guys. So it is time to ink some of the logos and writing on the signs here. Look at all my Ellipse tools. Okay. You know, let's start with the horse. To shade anything in because it's supposed to look like neon lights and glowing. So everything should pretty much be outlined. For example, this eye right here. For the hard part, the tiny writing on the signs. Inking with a brush took a lot of time to get used to, and I'm still getting used to it. And sometimes it even depends on the size of the brush that's being used. But there's a fluidness to it, whereas with a pen, even though it's more precise, it looks a little stiff sometimes, or takes a little bit more work just to get it to look fluid like this. So I'm letting the ink run out on some of the spots just so that I could use the, basically So when you first dip the brush in, it's loaded with ink, and if there's any spots that shouldn't be inked all the way or with a harsher line, it should be done after the spots that you could get away with. For example, the clothes having thicker lines and it's not perfect, but when it comes to the face or the hair, I want to be very careful with that, or the finer details. So I ink the unconsequential spots first, like the clothing and things away from the face. So right now I'm loading up the brush again, maybe wiping some of it off on the napkin and then going back in. See, the line is thicker and it's not as fine. And then once I feel like the ink has been used up a little bit during this one load, then I could go in and, let's just say, do some of the hair. And that's the trick, is making sure the brush isn't loaded with ink before doing really, really important details, because they'll be noticeable, and I had to learn that the hard way, of course. When in doubt, just use whiteout, I guess. But I'm going to try to avoid doing that, because sometimes when you scan pieces in with whiteout, it's very visible, even though, unless you change the threshold or the levels on it, then it would kind of blend it in pretty well. But if I don't have to do that, I'd rather not. What we have so far. I've basically started to ink the sky with the Sumi brush. Okay, now I'm going to go in and actually start to ink start to spot the dark spots on Saint. I have to be really thoughtful about every brush stroke here, because I run the risk of doing too much. And like I said before, I don't want to use whiteout. But it looks like I might end up doing it for some of the lighting accents. And since this scene takes place at night, and it's going to be in black and white, I have to figure out exactly where all the shadows are going to go. And I think I'm going to pull the line the direction of him falling so that there's a movement even in his jacket. so it's not going to be a solid black. I think at this point I'd love to have screen tones to speed up the process, and I think it'd look kind of cool, but it's really hard to get a hold of them right now. I love this Sumi brush. The lines vary so much from being really thin to pretty thick and everything in between. Again, I don't want it to be static, so I'm trying to create as much movement as possible with the clothing, the shading. I think for me the most important thing is movement more than complete accuracy and stuff like that. Because when you shrink this, you're not going to see a ton of detail. So whichever way the brush stroke is going to help push the main part of this forward, which is falling. So I think I'm going to go in and start inking the shadows underneath the buildings because this is a night scene. So maybe more movement down here. It's easy to go overboard with the speed lines because it's so much fun. And this is the part that I'm gonna need to think really hard about because it's easy, like I said, to go overboard in spotting where all the dark shadows are gonna go without going too far and then just completely diluting the whole entire piece. Not to mention I want to give it the neon sign feel to it, so it's easy to over ink it and make it too dark where it looks like everything is kind of, the signs don't really show up. So deciding where the darkest darks are going to go, where it's completely underneath the sign and you won't be able to see it at night, is probably where I'm going to start, and then kind of span outwards, squinting my eyes to see where I could probably add some glow to it without inking it. So chances are this is going to be lit really well right here, some right here, these signs. So I'll pick a few spots that'll help move the eye through the piece without over inking it. Just to separate Saint from the background. Okay, so here's the finishing touches, I think. I'm going to go in and add some telephone wires, or power cables, because technically speaking, it would be a different type of technology by this point. Let's see. I could probably just do this by hand. Okay, I'm going to go in and adjust some of the things that I over-inked or that might draw too much attention to itself. Yeah, I didn't like how the sword looked. Or katana. Maybe I could add lit wire right here. Just making tiny adjustments before I call this done. Okay, it's time to erase the pencil in the blue line. I'm gonna go ahead and scan this in, maybe add some digital halftones, and then print it out possibly and start coloring it. But if I didn't need to color it or don't plan on coloring it, I don't have to at this point, since I inked it as if it's not going to be colored. All right, done.